The Episcopal Church comes next in order, as she has been denominated the eldest daughter of Rome and sister of the man of sin. A more correct and sententious definition of this church has seldom or ever been given than by the celebrated Chatham in a splendid oration which he thundered in the House of Peers in favor of dissenters. Quote, "We have," said his lordship, "a popish liturgy, a Calvinistic creed, and an Arminian clergy." Unquote. The liturgy, or formulary of public devotions, is an ill-digested system of will-worship, of sung or said, chime over again, ceremonies of human invention, most unlike our scriptural and beautifully simple Presbyterian directory. The Church of England has no less than 3 creeds, or forms of words, in which the articles of her faith are comprehended: the Apostles' Creed, the Athanasian, and the Nicene. All are used in her public offices, and subscription to them is required of all her clergy. The 2 last contradict each other, as a learned bishop once observed. Quote, "It is something odd to have 2 creeds established in the same church, in one of which those are declared accursed who deny the Son to be of the same hypostasis with the Father, and in the other it is declared they cannot be saved but perish everlastingly who do not assert that there is one hypostasis of the Father and another of the Son." Unquote. See Togood's Dissent in page 205. The doctrine, however, in these and the 39 Articles and Homilies is mostly sound or Calvinistic, and this seems to be the only connecting link of this very imperfectly reformed church with God's visible covenant society. But such doctrine, it appears, is by no means generally believed or taught. A former bishop of Winchester, in a sermon on contending for the faith, quote, acknowledges it a thing beyond all contradiction that the doctrine of the Church of England, delivered in its articles relating to justification, God's decrees, and what are called the 5 points, had undergone such alterations as to be entirely changed in the writings and discourses of the members of that church. Unquote. Of her 18,000 clergy in England and Wales, it is stated by friends that 3,000 of late are become evangelical, or conformed in their sentiments to the symbols they have subscribed. Thus the highest calculation still leaves the strength from truth divided, as 15,000 remain, who must be feeding their starving flocks, not with the bread of life, but with the deleterious doctrines. It is difficult to see how they can spiritually survive, unless, like Mithridates, king of Pontus, they nourish themselves upon poisons from the days of Charles I and his conscience-keeper, pedantic, intolerant Laud. There has all along been a race of Church of England papists. Of late they have screwed their courage up and spoken out plainly and boldly, in what they style, quote, Tracts for the Times, 3 volumes, unquote, emitted by some members of that nursery of high church zealots, Oxford University, the worst errors of popery, such as transubstantiation, the worshipping of saints, honoring the Virgin, and images, and prayers from the Romish breviary, are strongly recommended. And this malignant leprosy of Rome, that is infinitely more destructive than the enervating sirocco, or pernicious malaria of her climate, has for years been rapidly spreading among the ministers and people of the Episcopal Communion throughout the 3 kingdoms. There is, therefore, a probability, from this and other signs of the times, that schismatical England will yet be reconverted to the faith of her early apostle, St. Augustine, and the grounds of protest which she took against the Church of Rome in the 16th century be overturned. The Honorable and Reverend Geo Spencer, brother to Earl Spencer, who left the Church of England, of which he was a clergyman, and became a popish priest, glowing with the zeal of a new convert, went to France, it was reported about 3 years ago, and united all the popish priests to pray and labor that, quote, England may be Catholic, unquote. And it cannot fail to be highly gratifying there and in other popish countries to learn the untiring exertions of non-Protestant traitors who lurk in her Christian hold. Often has the mystery of iniquity wrought underground like a mole. Long has it conducted its operations by a kind of spiritual Freemasonry. But now it is prompting those whom the Anglican Church supports with her bread and nourishes in her bosom to drive her in open day with railway speed over the Alps into Italy. This church, filled with corruption, is secular in her spirit, and one evil naturally generates and fortifies another. She has been allowed to exalt her mitred front in courts and parliaments, her theatrical dressing clergy, throwing the magisterial gown over the sanctity of the surplice, and those right reverend dignitaries, the lords spiritual, not always on the side of religion and good government, roist in the upper house among the peers of the realm. The amiable and learned Dr. Thomas Wilson, Bishop of Sodor and Man, who 100 years ago voluntarily resigned his seat there, is the only known instance of a prelate that did ever forego his carnal distinction. Like most of the inferior clergy, their preachment in general, when they deign to attempt it, is but a scurvy apology for a discourse, by misnomer called a sermon. Those, quote, "those who preach only 10 or 15 minutes may be in jest, but I," unquote, said Mr. Scott to the said good Mr. Scott, the commentator, to his vicar, who blamed him for preaching nearly an hour, quote, "am in earnest. To hear a bishop preach," says one of those who held a charge in the same church, "is a sort of phenomenon in this country, and if any of that truly respectable body of men do vouchsafe once in a way, as an extreme favor, to indulge the people of their diocese, where they happen to spend a little time, they usually affect so much pomp and dignity in their manner, and their discourses are so dry and unevangelical, so stiff, so cold, so ascetical, so critical, so ethical, so heathen-like, that the poor of the flock can receive little or no benefit and edification," unquote. That Reverend D. Simpson, M.A., Christ Church, Macclesfield, in his Plea for Religion, pages 118 through 123. Worthy old Bishop Latimer said of his most reverend brethren in his time, quote, "there is a gap in hell as wide as from Calais to Dover, and it is all filled with unpreaching prelates," unquote. With a few exceptions, these spiritual superiors are as secular, negligent, lukewarm, and unpreaching now as they were then. With only a pittance of about 3 millions of money, which political writers since the days of Lord Chatham estimate at 3 times that sum, or 9 millions, paid them annually, the established clergy of England, in their eager pursuit of church preferment, power, and wealth, have very generally forgotten, with the doctrines of their church, the duties of their high and holy office, and requisite sobriety of character. It was clearly proved on the discussion of the Pluralites' Bill in the House of Commons a few years ago that there were 6,000 livings without even a nominally resident clergyman. Hundreds of amateur parsons sport life away in places of gay, fashionable resort, or kill time by idle and sinful amusements. And when, as to such things, quote, "ministers go to the brink, others will push over the precipice," unquote. By their worldly spirit, negligent superintendence, and bad example, the country has been demoralized, irreligion and infidelity generated, and the most sacred institutions desecrated. Every kind of immorality and wickedness prevail unchecked, excepting by the magistrate. Swearing is so common that were Defoe, a candid Englishman, alive, he would find no cause to retract the following declaration which he published 28 years ago after the Revolution. Quote, "If a blind man was to come from thence," Scotland, "into England, he shall know the first town he sets his foot on within the English border by hearing the name of God blasphemed and profanely used, even by the very little children in the street," unquote. Among churchmen of every rank there is great ignorance of divine things and woeful disregard of the duties of practical religion. Indeed, anything like serious, uniform, personal, and domestic godliness is rarely to be seen, unless among a few misrepresented, despised, obscure individuals who in scorn receive the irreconcilable names of saints and hypocrites. The holy Sabbath is kept, but not sanctified. Few from a principle of religious duty obey, quote, "the blessed summons to the house of God," unquote. It is little wonder the Sabbath is profaned in England, for Bishop Morton drew up a declaration called a Book of Sports in the reign of James I, to encourage recreation and sports on the Lord's Day, and Archbishop Laud put his servant Charles I, made a martyr, though he could not be even a Christian, as he had only received Presbyterian baptism, upon republishing this declaration, which was accordingly done, and the effects of it have not yet been overcome. The sacraments are enjoyed by all in common who choose to partake of them. The gate of admission to these special and sacred privileges stands invitingly open to the scoundrel multitude. There is not even the restriction which was observed on receiving the animals into Noah's ark, for there the clean were taken in by sevens, but those which were not clean only by twos. Behold the picture. Is it like what some recreant presbyters lovingly call in a honeyed phrase, quote, the sister church, unquote. That boasted breakwater against the encroachments of the ocean, but for which long ere now popery and infidelity would have swept away Protestantism and all our religion to Charybdis.